"You're either a team player or you're gone," David Kessler said, his tone sharp and calculated. He slid the termination papers across the sleek glass table in the executive conference room, his smile all formality and no warmth. "Your choice, Monica." I stared down at the papers. Monica Alvarez, Senior Financial Analyst, Redwood Pacific Development. After 12 years of service, hundreds of late nights, and the trust of dozens of clients, this was how it ended on the wrong side of an ultimatum. I looked up, steady. "I won't falsify financial statements for the audit," I said clearly. "Not for you. Not for anyone." The fake smile dropped from David's face, replaced by a glint of irritation. "Then I believe we're done here." I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't cry. I picked up the pen, signed the termination notice, and slid it back to him. Just like that, I walked away from over a decade of work at one of Northern California's largest property investment firms, an operation I had once believed stood for integrity. As security arrived to escort me, I caught the stunned expressions of my coworkers as I walked through the wide-open floor plan. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others watched with interest, as though I were a car crash they couldn't help but slow down for. My assistant, Lindsay, rushed over with misty eyes, but the guards blocked her path. "Personal items only," one said firmly. I nodded and quietly filled a cardboard box with my coffee mug, framed photo of my kids, and a well-worn leather-bound planner. They could keep the company laptop and phone. What they didn't realize was that I had seen this coming. For months now, I had been quietly collecting documentation, every memo, every questionable instruction, every Slack message where someone suggested adjusting numbers to make the books look better. At 52, I was too old and too smart to play dumb. The moment they started hinting at creative accounting 3 months ago, I knew what was coming. I had seen this movie before. It always started with subtle suggestions and ended with someone taking the fall for fraud. As I exited the building for the last time, the California sun glared off the glass entry doors. I caught a glimpse of myself, graying hair tied into a low bun, blouse still neat despite the chaos of the morning, and an expression that was calm and composed. Outwardly, I looked fine. Inside, though, I was a storm. This wasn't just the end of a job. This was the beginning of a reckoning. Back at my condo in downtown Santa Rosa, I set the box on my dining table and transformed the space into a battlefield. I laid out paper copies of emails, printouts of expense reclassifications, and transcripts of calls I had recorded under California's dual consent rules, each one a tile in the mosaic of deception I was about to expose. I had always been the one who triple-checked numbers, who documented everything. Jason, my ex-husband, used to say I was too rigid, that I treated life like it was a spreadsheet. Maybe he was right. But in finance, accuracy wasn't just a preference. It was protection. I opened the email draft I'd prepared earlier. It was addressed to all 9 members of Redwood Pacific's board of directors. No drama, no emotion. Just the facts, supported by attachments documenting fraud ordered by Chief Financial Officer David Kessler and sanctioned by CEO Meredith Cross. I stared at the send button, my finger hovering as doubt tried to creep in. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Lindsay. "They're telling people you quit because you couldn't handle the pressure. David already met with someone to fill your job." That was all the confirmation I needed. I clicked send. The truth was no longer mine to carry alone. The message I sent to the board of Redwood Pacific Development was clinical, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion. No accusations. No sensationalism. Just spreadsheets, internal memos, and digital records laid out in black and white. The truth was plain. CFO David Kessler and CEO Meredith Cross had systematically manipulated financial records to deceive investors, inflate bonuses, and secure capital under false pretenses. My finger hovered over the send button. I paused, not because I questioned the evidence, but because I knew what this meant. Once that email left my outbox, I would no longer be just Monica Alvarez, a financial analyst. I would be a whistleblower. Some would admire me. Others would brand me disloyal or difficult. I'd become a symbol, willingly or not. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Lindsay. They're saying you quit because you couldn't handle the pressure. David already brought someone in for your role. That was it. No more hesitation. I hit send. Within minutes, the email was in the inboxes of every board member, the company's external auditors, and their retained legal counsel. I sat back in my chair and exhaled. The truth was out. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto my narrow balcony, staring at the lights of downtown Santa Rosa. Somewhere in those buildings, other people were being asked to compromise their values just like I had been. 12 years ago, Redwood Pacific was a small, mission-driven development firm with a strong focus on sustainable and affordable housing. I had joined because I believed in the work. Over time, that mission had eroded. The moment profit became the only measure of success, things shifted. 3 months ago, David had floated the idea of tweaking our debt-to-equity ratios to secure a loan. Standard industry stuff, he said. 2 months ago, it was inflating quarterly earnings by reclassifying operational expenses. That time, I recorded the meeting. 1 month ago, I was ordered to set up a shell LLC to hide a failing portfolio before our audit. I knew then that my career at Redwood Pacific was nearing its end. I just hadn't expected it to be so sudden or so cold. The next morning, the response came swiftly. By 8 a.m., I had 3 missed calls from unknown numbers. One was from board chairwoman Helen Cho, who I'd always respected for her no-nonsense leadership. She didn't mince words when we finally spoke. "We've called an emergency board meeting for noon," she said. "The documents you sent, they're alarming. We need to understand what happened. Would you be willing to join via video?" "Yes," I replied. "I've already prepared a statement." That morning, I spread out my documents on the dining table once more, highlighting key points, matching emails to financial records, and double-checking every timeline. When noon arrived, I logged into the call. The digital meeting room filled with familiar faces, some tense, some unreadable. Helen began, "The board has reviewed the materials you sent, Ms. Alvarez. We've also consulted with legal counsel. Before any decisions are made, we want to hear directly from you." For the next 30 minutes, I walked them through every step. From the subtle nudges to manipulate balance sheets to the outright demands to fabricate earnings. I explained how David had escalated the pressure after I expressed concern and how Meredith had knowingly approved several transactions I flagged as problematic. Board member Jonathan Wu asked pointedly, "Do you have documentation for all of this?" "I do," I said without hesitation. "Every instance is supported by emails, internal chats, meeting notes, or recorded calls. All obtained legally under California's two-party consent laws. I've been in accounting for 30 years. I know the value of a clean audit trail." The silence that followed was the kind that only comes when people realize they've been complicit, willingly or not. And I wasn't done yet. They understood the importance of evidence. That much was clear from the silence that followed. They didn't just believe me. They realized they were cornered. If they failed to act on the information I provided, they wouldn't just be negligent, they'd be complicit. "Thank you for your candor, Ms. Alvarez," Helen Cho finally said. "Please keep your phone nearby. Our legal team will be in touch." 3 hours later, my inbox pinged with a company-wide press release from Redwood Pacific. The statement was clear and urgent. David Kessler and CEO Meredith Cross were being placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full, independent investigation into allegations of financial impropriety. The company had also reported the matter to the Securities and Exchange Commission and pledged full cooperation with federal authorities. Moments later, my phone lit up. It was Lindsay. "Monica, it's chaos here," she whispered, barely able to contain the shock in her voice. Security just walked Kessler and Cross out of the building. "People are freaking out. There's talk that the feds might show up." I listened quietly before replying. I told the truth. That evening, I received an email directly from Helen Cho. She was requesting an in-person meeting the following morning. I had my suspicions. Was this an attempt to control the damage? To offer a payout and a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for my silence? It was a common corporate tactic to manage whistleblowers once they'd become a legal risk. Still, I accepted the meeting. As I was getting ready for bed, a LinkedIn notification buzzed on my phone. A message from Marcus Shin, a former colleague who now worked at Veltric Optics. Heard what happened at Redwood. We're hiring a finance director, someone who actually believes in ethics. Interested? Tears welled up in my eyes. Not from sadness, but from the first flickers of validation. I had risked everything, and maybe, just maybe, it hadn't been for nothing. Still, I knew this wasn't over. The truth was out, but the fallout was just beginning. The next morning, Redwood Pacific stock had already fallen nearly 15% by the time I arrived at the office. The building that once hummed with the energy of real estate deals now sat quiet and tense. Reporters lingered near the entrance, microphones in hand, waiting for someone with a badge to break the silence. Security met me in the lobby and escorted me up to the top floor, ironically, the same floor I had been escorted from just 2 days earlier. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Helen was waiting in the boardroom, along with 2 others. She introduced them as Terrence Walker, Redwood's senior legal counsel, and Josephine Nguyen, a partner at an external firm specializing in corporate compliance and whistleblower protections. "Thank you for coming, Monica," Helen said, her voice serious but respectful. "We've launched a full independent investigation, but before we go further, we wanted to speak with you directly. We'd like to understand just how far these issues go." Before I could respond, Josephine cleared her throat. "Before we begin, I want to formally note that Ms. Alvarez is here voluntarily and should be treated as a whistleblower protected under federal law. She is not a hostile party and is entitled to all relevant legal protections." I nodded in appreciation. Though I suspected Josephine's concern had more to do with minimizing Redwood's exposure than safeguarding me, her words still gave me some comfort. "Of course," Helen agreed smoothly. "Monica, your background speaks for itself. You've spent nearly 2 decades in this field, and your insights are invaluable as we assess the damage." 17 years, I corrected out of habit. It was a small thing, but in my line of work, precision always mattered. For the next hour, I walked them through everything, how the fraud started with small, easily dismissed irregularities and evolved into a full-blown system of deception. Each time I raised concerns internally, I was told to stay in my lane or trust leadership. When I didn't comply, the pressure escalated. Eventually, the ultimatum came, and my career with Redwood ended. But their reckoning was just beginning. As external financial pressures mounted on the company, I explained how David Kessler had carefully compartmentalized the deception. Different team members were assigned specific tasks without ever being given the full picture. Each directive seemed minor on its own, but together, they formed a calculated strategy of misrepresentation. Only one person had access to every financial process, every reconciled report, and every manipulated figure. That person was me. As senior financial analyst, I had been the nexus. Every spreadsheet, projection, and ledger passed through my hands. I had the full picture, something David had severely underestimated. "How many others do you believe were knowingly involved?" Terrence asked, scribbling diligently into his notebook. "Based on hard evidence," I replied, "only David Kessler and Meredith Cross. Others may have suspected, but David was careful to preserve plausible deniability. Instructions were vague, emails cryptic, and changes were often explained as temporary adjustments. It was textbook obfuscation." Helen Cho leaned forward. "Monica, I'm going to be completely candid. The board is prepared to offer you reinstatement, with a significant promotion and compensation package. We need someone with your ethical standards and institutional knowledge to help clean this up." I blinked. It wasn't what I had expected. I'd come anticipating legal defensiveness, or perhaps a polished severance offer with a non-disclosure agreement attached. But this was different. This was a plea. I appreciate the offer, I said slowly, but I don't believe returning is the right path for me or for Redwood Pacific. Helen looked taken aback. She clearly wasn't used to hearing no. May I ask why? She said. You'd be coming in with full board support, and the compensation would reflect your value. Because the issue goes deeper than David or Meredith, I said plainly. The board has received quarterly reports for years, reports with inflated figures and distorted KPIs. You approved bonus packages based on numbers that, in hindsight, were impossible. So either the board failed in its duty of oversight, or some of you knew and chose to ignore it. The room went quiet. Josephine shifted in her chair, her eyes suddenly avoiding mine. Terrence stopped writing altogether. That's a serious accusation, Helen said, her voice tight. It's not an accusation. It's an analysis, I replied. And as someone who has spent the last 17 years in financial compliance, I can say with confidence that my credibility would be compromised if I returned to the same company whose leadership failed to act, or worse, enabled it. No one spoke for a long moment. The meeting wrapped with no firm resolution. As I stepped into the hallway, my phone vibrated with a new email. It was from the Securities and Exchange Commission. They were requesting an interview. The federal investigation had officially begun. I walked out of Redwood Pacific's building for the last time, this time on my own terms. The air felt clearer. The weight was still heavy, but it was finally mine to carry, not hide. 3 weeks later, I sat across from investigative journalist Benjamin Harris in a downtown cafe. His coverage of the Redwood scandal had made national headlines, turning a local housing firm's collapse into a national case study in corporate corruption. Just to confirm, Benjamin said, glancing at his notes, "You're comfortable with me quoting you on the timeline of events?" I nodded, scanning the draft on his tablet. Everything attributed to me is accurate. Just remember, we agreed this is about corporate accountability, not personal revenge. He smiled, handing me back the tablet. Of course, though readers always love a little drama. Want to comment on what it felt like watching Redwood's stock drop 30% since this broke? I took a slow sip of my coffee. I take no joy in watching a company I once believed in unravel. There are good people at Redwood. People who are now unsure of their future because of a few reckless decisions at the top. Benjamin nodded, his expression thoughtful. There was more to say, but the real story was only just beginning. He looked disappointed, but made a note. Fair enough. What about the SEC investigation? Sources say you've had several interviews with federal regulators. I can't comment on an ongoing investigation, I replied, my voice even and rehearsed. Before he could press further, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Monica Alvarez speaking, I said, excusing myself from the table. Ms. Alvarez, this is William Bennett, Chief Compliance Officer at Sterling West Financial. The name snapped me to attention. Sterling West was one of Redwood Pacific's biggest competitors in the Western real estate investment market. I was hoping we could meet to discuss a potential opportunity. We arranged a meeting for the following day, and I returned to the table. Benjamin raised an eyebrow, clearly curious. Another job offer? He asked, half smiling. That's the third one I've watched you take since we sat down. He wasn't wrong. In the week since the Redwood story had broken, I'd received a steady stream of messages, some from headhunters, some direct from executive teams. My new status as the whistleblower who took down Redwood's leadership had made me both a threat and a commodity. Would you believe me if I said it was a cold call about my car's extended warranty? I joked. Benjamin chuckled. Not for a second. Then his tone shifted. There's something you should know before this goes to print. He glanced around the cafe and leaned in. I've uncovered connections between Redwood Pacific's accounting practices and Redwood Capital Partners. My chest tightened. Redwood Capital was a massive private equity firm, one with a reputation for aggressive acquisitions and deep political ties. What kind of connections? I asked, trying to sound calm. Financial flows that don't add up. Shared board members. Audit patterns that mirror what you documented at Redwood Pacific. If I'm right, this isn't isolated. Redwood Pacific might have just been a piece of a larger pattern. That changed everything. If what he was saying was true, my whistleblower report could trigger scrutiny far beyond one company. Which also meant some very powerful people might now have a vested interest in silencing me. As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. You've made your point. Walk away now if you know what's good for you. I showed the message to Benjamin. His eyes widened. Are you going to report it? He asked. I already have, I said, forwarding the text to my attorney. It just confirms what I've started to suspect. This isn't about one CFO. It's bigger. The question is, how far down does it go? The next morning, I arrived at Sterling West's headquarters, a modern glass tower overlooking the northern hills of Santa Rosa. I was led to a sleek conference room where William Bennett waited, along with CEO Victoria Larson and a sharply dressed woman introduced as Imani Johnson, head of internal audit. Thank you for coming, Ms. Alvarez, Victoria began after brief pleasantries. Let me get to the point. We've been closely following the Redwood situation, and we're incredibly impressed by your integrity. I nodded, listening carefully. I had learned to trust the tone beneath the words. What they said next would determine whether I was walking into an opportunity or into another web of silence. William nodded in agreement. In today's regulatory environment, companies like ours are under the microscope. We need someone with both technical skill and moral courage leading our compliance team. We'd like to offer you the position of Chief Compliance Officer, Victoria continued. You'd report directly to me, have full access to the board, and complete control over the compliance budget and staffing. Build the department the way you see fit. It wasn't just an offer, it was a leap forward. A suite-level position, more authority and compensation than I'd ever had at Redwood Pacific. I studied them carefully before responding. That's very generous, I said, choosing my words. But may I ask, what prompted such a substantial offer to someone you've only just met? Victoria and William exchanged a brief glance. Honesty, Victoria said. And fear. Not of you, but of becoming the next Redwood. The regulatory landscape is shifting, and we need someone who can ensure we're not just compliant on paper. Imani spoke up for the first time. I reviewed your work when we competed with Redwood on the Westridge Development Project. Your financial modeling was flawless. Talent like yours is rare. Their openness was disarming. Still, something didn't sit right. The offer came too quickly, too conveniently. I had just emerged from a firestorm, and now they were offering me a seat at their table? It felt less like trust and more like a tactic. Before I consider anything, I said, I need to ask a difficult question. I looked directly at Victoria. What is Sterling West's relationship with Redwood Capital Partners? The energy in the room changed. Victoria's polished smile faltered. William's posture stiffened. They're a minority investor in some of our projects, Victoria answered carefully. Why do you ask? Because I've received credible information linking Redwood Capital to the same kind of financial irregularities I exposed at Redwood Pacific, I said, watching their reactions closely. And I've recently received a threatening message, suggesting I stop investigating. Imani's eyes widened, her expression darkening. What kind of threat? I showed them the anonymous text message. Victoria leaned forward to read it, her expression hard to read. This is concerning, William said after a pause. But what exactly does this have to do with our offer? Everything, I replied. If I accept this position, I would need full autonomy to investigate any potential wrongdoing, no restrictions, even if that means investigating your investors. Victoria was quiet for several seconds. Let me be blunt, Monica. We're offering you this job because we want to stay out of the headlines. If there's something off about Redwood, we'd rather know now than later. Or, I said softly, you already know, and you're trying to keep me close controlled. No one argued. The silence was answer enough. I think we're done here, I said, rising and collecting my folder. Thank you for your time. As I walked toward the elevator, William caught up to me. You're making a mistake. We genuinely need someone like you. Then prove it, I said. Order an independent audit of every project tied to Redwood Capital. Not internal. Independent. And when that's done, we can talk again. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. William stayed behind, thoughtful but silent. As the doors closed, I took a deep breath. Had I just walked away from a legitimate opportunity, or had I narrowly avoided a trap laid by the very people I was investigating? The answer wasn't clear, but the SEC's investigation was gaining speed. And I had no intention of backing down. 6 weeks after I submitted my whistleblower report, I found myself sitting in a federal building conference room in downtown San Francisco, next to my attorney, Isla Jackson. Across from us, Special Agent Diaz from the Securities and Exchange Commission reviewed a thick case file as he laid out the charges. David Kessler and Meredith Cross will be charged with securities fraud, conspiracy, and falsifying financial records, he said plainly. These charges are based in large part on the evidence you provided, Ms. Alvarez. Isla gave me a quiet, approving nod. And the board? I asked. Diaz flipped to another section of the file. 2 board members, including former Chair Helen Cho, will be charged with willful blindness and breach of fiduciary duty. The words hit like a final stamp of truth. I had known there were more than 2 people responsible, but this was a start. Diaz continued, the investigation into Redwood Capital Partners is ongoing. That will take more time, powerful connections, deep legal pockets. I understood what he meant without him having to say it directly. Redwood wasn't just another firm, it was a fortress. Taking them on would be like scaling a mountain in a storm. What happens next? I asked. Depositions, formal statements, and potentially testifying in court, Isla said. And you'll want to think about your next move professionally. That question had been circling in my mind for weeks. Since the incident at Sterling West, I'd turned down multiple job offers. Everyone wanted the woman who exposed Redwood Pacific, but I had no interest in being used as a PR stunt or risk walking into another ethically bankrupt boardroom. Diaz reached into his folder and slid a business card across the table. If you're open to it, there's someone at the Financial Crimes Division who would like to speak with you. A consulting role. Your experience would be an asset. I picked up the card, surprised. I hadn't considered working for the government, but it made a strange kind of sense. Who better to track fraud than someone who had seen it play out from the inside? As we exited the building, Isla handed me a sealed envelope. This just came through. Your final SEC Whistleblower Award determination. I opened it, skimmed the first line, and froze. My eyes widened. The amount was staggering. Over $2 million? I whispered. That's 15% of the penalties assessed against Redwood Pacific, Isla confirmed. You earned every penny, Monica. You did the right thing, and for once, it actually paid off. For the first time since this storm began, I allowed myself to feel something like peace. Maybe even vindication. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of a corporate ethics conference, addressing a full ballroom of compliance officers, accountants, and federal regulators. My keynote focused on a simple truth: the pressure to compromise doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in small asks, friendly nudges, and cultures that celebrate results over process. By the time someone asks you to commit fraud, you've already been trained to say yes. In the front row sat the team from my new firm, Integrity Financial Advisory. I'd used my whistleblower award as seed funding and built a company dedicated to forensic auditing and ethical systems design. 6 months in, we had 8 clients and growing demand. Real integrity, I told the audience, means building systems that reward honesty, not just detect dishonesty. Afterward, as I mingled, a familiar voice called my name. Monica. I turned to see Lindsay, my former assistant from Redwood Pacific, now my operations director. That was amazing, she said, hugging me. Though I might be biased, since I technically work for the speaker. I smiled. This time, It wasn't just about survival. It was about purpose. I smiled. Hiring Lindsay as my firm's operations director had been one of the first decisions I made. Her loyalty during the Redwood Pacific scandal had proven her integrity beyond doubt. "How are the new clients coming along?" I asked. "We just signed O'Quinn Technologies," she replied, her eyes bright. "That makes 14 clients in 6 months. We're going to need more staff," she added. "We'll find them," I assured her. "The right people, ones who value integrity over convenience." As we chatted, a notification lit up on my phone. David Kessler's name was trending. The headline was short and direct. "Former Redwood CFO sentenced to 8 years for securities fraud." I felt no joy at his downfall. No vindictive satisfaction. Just a quiet sense of confirmation that sometimes the system did what it was supposed to do. That justice, like proper accounting, eventually balances its books. This journey had never been about revenge, not really. It was about truth. About showing that in the world of finance, as in life, integrity is the only currency that never loses its value. In the wake of the scandal, I hadn't just rebuilt my career, I'd redefined it. While Redwood Pacific struggled to recover under new leadership, I was helping other companies stay off the path that had nearly destroyed so many. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't ruining the people who wronged you. It's building something better from the ruins they left behind and making sure it stands for something they never did. I didn't set out to become a whistleblower. I was just doing my job, paying attention, asking questions, refusing to cut corners. But when integrity came into conflict with pressure from the top, I had a choice to make. I chose to stand by the truth, even when it cost me my job, my reputation, for a while, even my sense of security. Now that you've heard my story, I want to hear yours. Have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing meant standing alone? Have you walked away from something comfortable because your conscience wouldn't let you stay? If so, share your experience in the comments. Let others see they're not alone. And if you've never been in that position, offer a few words of encouragement. Someone reading may need to hear them today. Here's what I've learned. Integrity is a long game. It rarely rewards you in the moment. But over time, it builds a life you can actually be proud of, one built on trust, purpose, and peace of mind. And that's something no paycheck can ever match. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the underdog who did what was right instead of what was easy, subscribe to this channel. Stick around. We've got more stories just like mine. Stories of courage, of justice, of people who refused to fold when the stakes were high. Thank you for walking this journey with me. And remember, the strongest people aren't always the loudest. Sometimes, they're the ones who quietly refuse to betray what they believe in even when no one's watching. Let's keep this conversation going. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear next.